I was brought up by my grandfather's observation that 10 minutes early is almost late. So I tend to follow that. So like I said, we'll get started in just a moment here, or at least have a rolling start. We'll see how that works out.
I apologize because I have to leave at 12:30.
Not to worry, not to worry. We will do all the good stuff first then.
Oh, good.
We'll see how that works out. Well, I see the clock has struck midnight. Well, it's 12 o'clock in any event, not quite midnight. So I don't turn into a pumpkin. But my name is Rabbi Ron Goldberg. Some of you I know, so a fair number I don't. I am a member of HAMAKOM, formerly Shomer Torah, formerly Temple Beth Ami. So I've been around the organization for a long time. Like Miriam, I am a past president of the congregation also. Um, Most recently, I just retired. Took an early retirement from LA Jewish Home over in scenic Reseda, California. And because I had some free time and Rabbi Vogel and Rabbi Cameras can't stand to see a rabbi idle, they asked me if I could fill in today. So I thought I would do that. I want to share a little bit more about my teaching style goes kind of like this as I look around around the room, around the computer screen here. Um, I think it'd be epically boring for me to do all the talking for the next hour. Um, I want to leave the room smarter than when I entered it. And before somebody says the obvious joke, yes, I know that's kind of a low bar, but my thinking goes like this. I already know what I think. Okay, I have a pretty good idea what I think, but I'm in a room with a bunch of people who have a lot of life experience, a lot of life education. You've been exposed to different teachers over time. So I'll introduce a topic and I'll put my thoughts out there, but I'm perfectly good with disagreement. One of the great things about being Jewish is we are perfectly good with disagreement. I'll tell a quick story along those lines that illustrates that. When I was a student rabbi, I interned at a place called Beit Shuvah. Some of you might be familiar with it. Beit Shuvah, of course, is the Jewish faith-based addiction recovery center, and I here on Venice Boulevard. And I was teaching a class we called it Talmud Tuesday, and one of the guys in my class um, was had been studying for the priesthood in Mexico. The Beit Shuvah does not take exclusively Jewish clients, and we're having a discussion about something in Bible. I remember what it was from Torah, and I had a couple of yeshiva bachers in the class, and they're arguing with me. They're getting very loud. They're getting very vocal. And finally, our friend Martin has had enough. He stands up, slams his hand on the desktop, and yells, "Don't talk to Rabbi Ron like that. It's disrespectful." And I had the class started laughing because that's how Jewish people exchange ideas. We're good with, I think the answer is blue, you think it's green. If you study Talmud, that rich tractates of rabbinic text, you learn over time that very rarely does Talmud come to an agreement. It typically comes to they ask a question, and the discussion typically goes, Rabbi Shimon thinks the answer is blue, Rabbi Akiva thinks it's green, and the sages think it's yellow. We're okay with all that. What
Teal.
my friend Martin couldn't understand is that in Catholicism that he had been studying and had grown up in, there is a single answer. That if there was a question, they go to the catechism, they go to the senior person present, and whatever they said the answer was, that was it. The Jewish people don't see things quite the same way. We're perfectly good with arguing. If you do any Bible studying for any length of time, any Torah study, you'll run into a volume called a Mikrot Gedolot, which literally means great writings. And it's a compendium of the words of our sages. And who is our gold standard of sages? of course, would be Rashi. Rashi is our gold standard. Torah commentary begins with him, but it doesn't end with him. And what you'll frequently see is even Rashi's grandchildren become Torah scholars, and they'll be commenting on something their grandfather had said, and they'll say essentially, Pops was wrong. And we're okay with that. We're okay with that. So as we sit here together learning, I'm good with disagreement. I'm good with people having another point of view. And it's because of that that I get a chance to leave the room smarter than when I walked into the room. We sent out a PDF of some of the things I wanted to take a look at today, some text to share and to puzzle over and to consider. But before we do this week, I've got to back up a week. Because last week in Parsha Yitro had my favorite single line in Torah. I don't know if you had a chance to go over it last week or not, but it's Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. And I'm going to read the Hebrew first. V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. And the scene, of course, is Moses is receiving the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. And Torah tells us, V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. Anybody want to take a shot at translating that?
Excuse me, what line was that? 20 what?
Okay, that's going to be verse 20, line 15.
15, okay, thank you. Okay.
George, point your camera down a little bit. I'll always see as the top of your baseball
Oh,
cap.
I don't know how to adjust it.
Okay, problem
It
solved.
doesn't adjust too well, so
All right, problem
I can
solved.
stand back further. How's that?
Okay. So, Kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, and I'll go ahead and do this. And all the people saw the voices.
Yeah, yeah.
What's wrong with that, George?
Well, you don't see sound, but I get that.
Okay, and that's essentially it. You do not see sound.
Yeah.
And you see this line often translated as the people perceive the thunder and the lightning. But that's not it. The literal translation is the people saw the voices. And in a lot of ways, this is, hi, Leora, we needed some help with Hebrew translation.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you're here now.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
The people saw the voices.
Yeah.
And I love this line because I personally think when I look at some of the commentary of the sages, some of them try to explain it away like, oh, no, they mean they heard the thunder and they saw the lightning. Other sages, who I happen to agree with, think that it's literal. That in the presence of the Kadosh Baruch Hu at Mount Sinai with receiving the commandments, the laws of physics are suspended.
Yeah.
And I find that totally fascinating. I have a running debate with one of my rabbinic colleagues on whether Torah is great literature or not. And my thesis basically goes, if you were a modern writer and you brought in Torah to a modern publisher and editor, they would give it back to you. And they would say, when you can plug up some of these problems with continuity, if you can solve some of these lapses in conversation, if you can flesh out some of these events, let's talk. Torah tends to be pretty sparse. It doesn't share an awful lot of material. So the question becomes, is it literal? I think in my worldview, this is one of those lines where it means exactly what it says. In the presence of God at Mount Sinai, receiving the commandments, that the laws of physics were suspended and the people indeed saw sound. One of these sages, I'm forgetting who it was, actually comments that how he envisioned it. And remember, this is somebody writing basically just past Roman times. He sees the words written in the sky like skywriting. Who remembers skywriting? Something we don't see too much anymore. But they very much envisioned it being like that. So that was my favorite line of Torah. And all the people saw the voices. Anybody disagree? Think it's not literal? Anybody think?
I don't think it's disagreement. I don't disagree with that. And that I think God is saying the world as we perceive it is not all there is. And we need to be very careful with our perceptions because there's a lot more there.
So, that's fascinating in this regard. So one of my constant teachings that it's a big world, that two of us see the same thing, and one person perceives it as amazing and wonderful. I know that we had the God class earlier in the week, and we were talking. It was Rabbi Heschel, I think, was the rabbi we spoke about this week. Rabbi Heschel's big thesis, you have to remember, is live your life in radical amazement. Okay, that everything is amazing. It's amazing that things work the way that they do. It's amazing that all these things happen. So I agree with you that there is more than one perception. There's more than one thing going on, and we have to be aware of that. When I think about that idea of radical amazement, I'm radically amazed that we find. My wife has an expression in Hebrew, "Kasher limso ahava," that it's tough to find love. So that we find our beshert and they find us is to me is radical amazement on its face. Let's leap into this week's parsha, Mishpatim. We have a parsha dedicated to the reciting of lots and lots and lots of laws. So I have an easy question. What's the point of law? Why do we have, go ahead, please.
Oh,
To protect
Go
society,
ahead. Go ahead.
to protect society and the continuation of society.
Okay, so to protect society. Who wants to build on that?
I
What?
think to make order.
Right.
Okay, so this is on something on a real simplistic level, to protect and to maintain order. Red light means
Right.
Stop.
good, just making sure somebody knew the answer. And green light means
Go.
yellow.
Wait,
Maybe.
maybe.
Wait and see what happens.
Well, so yellow is very, very negotiable and debatable. There's one theory is drive faster, one theory is slow down. So, but we exist with both. But the purpose of law, let's expand on this a little bit, is number one, to create an orderly society
Right.
and to protect the basis of that society. A law, I don't think law is so much about justice. I mean, it should be, but I think law is about creating seder, about creating order. That, like I said, that red light, green light thing is very, very basic. We all agree upon that. Okay. If we don't agree on red being stop and green being go, we have complete and utter chaos. So we start off at that point with this idea. Excuse me. So we start off with this idea that we need the laws to create order and to help us. I'm going to add one more element to it. I would say to help us live well. To help us live well, and somebody said in order, but I'd also add in safety. That we're trying to create an orderly, safe society. And I think that, to me, that becomes one of the larger purposes of law. Justice, I think, is one of those things that balances out. Justice and mercy become the next two elements of law. That law should be just, and there should be compassion within them. And we're going to encounter some of that as we go through this today. I pulled out, I think it's something like 11 pieces of text. George is thinking that's not nearly enough, but
Start with one. Let's go.
well, okay, that's an interesting thing too. We might get through all of them. We might get, as you say, we might get stuck with one, but that's perfectly okay also.
Right.
So number one, a person who fatally strikes another party shall be put to death. So yeah.
Okay, well, it's with intent. If it's by accident, then it's a different story.
So, interestingly enough, there's two things I want to point out. One, it doesn't talk about intent in this particular pasuk. This particular line doesn't talk about intent.
What about in
somewhere-
defense? What if you're
Somewhere it says
defending
lying in
yourself?
wait. I forgot where.
Now we bogged down 30 seconds in. Excellent. Okay, so let's back up just a couple of steps. First of all, if anybody printed out the sheet or has it handy, you'll notice that I put 3 words in the Hebrew into bold letters.
What's the site? I don't have the, what,
Okay, so the Vamat Mut Yumat. So
what's
it,
the line?
oh, it's 21:12.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Okay. When you see in Torah a doubling of verbs
right.
appears twice, you really, what it's saying to us is, you will definitely do this, and this will surely
Yeah,
happen. We have it here
Right,
in triplicate. So it's telling us you're absolutely positively going to put this party to death.
Right.
Okay, 3 variations, three forms of the verb to death.
Right.
So the first thing somebody brought up, George, you brought up, whether it's in by accident or with intentionality. Somebody else I heard mention self-defense.
No.
I did.
Okay, and that's a valid point. So one of the things you discover about Jewish law and Jewish practice is there's very few absolutes. Once you ever familiar with the word dogma?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's a good working definition of dogma? So dogma, besides being a pretty good movie from the 1990s, is a piece of religious law that is just accepted without question. Judaism doesn't have a lot of absolute dogma. Once you step away from there's only one God, there's not a lot of dogma. Okay, so your example of self-defense can be a mitigating factor. War is a mitigating factor.
Right.
All these things are going to come play. Intentionality is going to become a mitigating factor. So we're very comfortable with the idea that these things aren't absolutes. There's always going to be a reason. So like when I work with middle school kids, one of their favorites is, Rabbi, we're not allowed to have pork. What if you're stuck on a deserted island and the only thing you can eat on the island is wild pig?
Right.
Okay. Well, the Judaism's response is, enjoy the pig. Get a bunch of recipes because you're supposed to live by the laws, not die by them.
Right.
Okay. And when you return to civilization, you have the ability to observe kashrut. You should do so, but you're not supposed to die by trying to keep kosher. Okay. We continue with this death penalty thing, though.
Mhm.
George, is going to be 21:15 and through 21:17. One who strikes one's father or mother shall be put to death. One who insults one's father or mother shall be put to death. And again, we got that same doubling of verbs for to die.
Right.
What's the problem with this one? Okay, maybe it's just me. If insulting your mom and dad is a death penalty offense, I would not be here today. Okay? If you've raised teenagers, you know how problematic this can be. Words that are said in anger, in jokingly, or just being around teenage. Yeah, George?
Yeah, you said he who insults, it says Makeh strikes.
The next one, go to 17.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize on that. Okay.
But we're going to come back to strikes, but I'm talking with an insult is one.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No problem. Insult is a little bit easier. I can think of a number of things either I said or how I conducted myself might have been offensive to my parents. Okay. One who strikes his parents, definitely going to put that child to death.
Right.
How many children? Yes, please.
I'm wondering if it isn't referring to I've always taken it literally, but I'm wondering if it isn't speaking also to a spiritual death. As we start doing things that violate the law protects us and protects us in our ability to love others when we don't feel like loving them. And that's part of the reason it's there. It protects our love. So it's a kind of a spiritual death. And if you keep having multiple little spiritual deaths, ultimately you are separated from God. And I think maybe it's that.
I think that you're onto something. I think certainly that the more we sin, the more we transgress, the more remote we make ourselves from Kedusha, from holiness. I would put out there This is what's written in the text is literal. That they, particularly when they've doubled the verbs like they have, they mean that as a capital offense. So here's a hard question. How many children do you think were ever put to death under these statutes?
0.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think it's Stephen George exactly. I think it's 0. Later on in the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to come into another discussion called the stubborn and rebellious
right.
child. Okay. And again, besides me, anybody fit that category? Because I certainly did any number of times. Yeah. Thank you. So the stubborn and rebellious child. And they talk about how if you have a child who's stubborn and rebellious, you got to take him to the elders of the city. And something's kind of interesting. The father and the mother have to declare him stubborn and rebellious.
Right.
Now, why in a patriarchal world do you think they want the mom to say to declare him stubborn and rebellious? Why the mom also?
Because the mom's more tender-hearted usually, and fathers are very concerned about how they're going to be in the real world and can be a little harsher in terms of teaching what the consequences are than mothers.
Good. All of the above. Okay, Nancy?
Okay, I think in my family, my mother was a disciplinarian. So maybe that's a reason.
Interestingly enough, I'm going to take us to this point. It's kind of going to blend the two. You're right that it varies from family to family who might be the angel of mercy. Okay, and sometimes the one who is the disciplinarian is not who you expect it to be. Okay, but I think in the world that our ancestors lived in, very much a patriarchy, they were very concerned that who will always stand up for the child? Always, always, always.
That would be the mother.
Absolutely. Mom always, I always get not a laugh, but it always kind of intrigues me. They'll be interviewing the mother of a mass murderer, and he was always such a good boy. I believe her. But mom will always, always, always be that the Malachei Rachamim, the angel of mercy for the children. It almost so I think our sages and Torah wants us, if mom says the kid is stubborn and rebellious, then definitely they are.
Right.
Okay. How many kids? Yes.
Do you think it's also about setting the precedent for 2 witnesses before you engage?
Yeah, right.
Whether it's murder or anything else, you have to have 2 witnesses against a person.
Sure.
So you have both parents if it's a child.
Hold that for 1 second, Kathleen. Okay. I want to talk about the stubborn and rebellious kid for a second. Then we'll circle back to justice, to the legal system. Okay.
Okay.
Obviously, again, how many people do we think were actually put to death under the statute? And I think the answer is 0.
0.
Because what the rabbis later do in Roman times is take this law and basically strip it of all its honor. Remember, the key phrase there is stubborn and rebellious child. So when does a child cease being a child?
It's a 12 and a 12 and a half or something. There's
Right,
it's like a half year in there that it's.
So let's call it bar mitzvah age. You're exactly correct, George. Bar mitzvah age.
Okay.
Hey, prior to that, they're a minor child.
Yeah.
They're really not liable for their actions because they're a minor. So the rabbis worked very hard. The idea of killing children was repugnant to them. So they worked very hard at they didn't take the law out of Torah, but they pretty much legislated it out of existence.
Yeah, he also had to be a drunkard and a glutton. So
yes, this is true. This is true.
Yeah.
Why a drunkard and a glutton? So I'm imagining a 12-year-old drunk. Drunk is already problematic. And they even go into in the Mishnah describing how much wine is too much to be qualified as a drunkard and how much food is too much to be qualified as a glutton.
Right.
They see these as the 2 major sins. Kathleen, I want to circle back to your points of policy and procedure. Ultimately, in Jewish law, how to affect the death penalty, like for example, You're going to need witnesses. You're going to need to have, that's all going to be legislated in. At this point in our chapter in Mishpatim, they haven't gotten that far yet. They're getting the law. One of the challenges when it comes to law is, what does the law say? Then how do we enforce it and how do we live it? And they haven't gotten that far yet. They're going to, but they haven't gotten there yet on how to live these laws. Stan, are you trying to say something?
Yeah, well, don't you think that it's problematic to have in the Torah laws that are really obviously not enforceable? It's one thing to say I can interpret it one way or another, but it's another thing to say if this law is obviously not enforceable, and then there's all kinds of other laws that you want. Certainly the rabbis change things, but we're reading from the Torah. So I think the whole concept, of course, I don't take it literally anyway, but if I did, I'd be very troubled to say that was there to begin with, that I had to manipulate in order to alleviate the problems with it.
I think it's good that you're troubled. I think it really is. I think that one of the concepts when it comes to looking at Torah is this phrase, Basher Husham. Literally means you're meeting people where they're at. So the generation Torah who received Torah, who it's written for, are living in a vastly different world, a vastly different society than we are. The challenge to us is, how do we have these things be relevant and meaningful in our time? Okay, so putting children to death for insulting their parents. I can think of, without breaking a sweat, at least 3 times my mom and dad under this law would have been perfectly justified in enacting that, okay?
The problem with that law is that we would never have grandchildren. So it just doesn't work. You need to let them live so we can have the grandchildren.
So, Miriam, you've heard me say this before. I am the world's worst grandfather. It's a running debate in my house.
And you are not.
The kids come. I'm glad they come and visit. I'm glad that they came. I'm also pretty good when they leave. And as they're walking them out to the car, my wife is already in tears. Oh, they're leaving. Yotzim, they're leaving. And I'm going, Jude, they're still in the car right in front of us. They haven't even left yet. You can't miss them until they leave. Miriam, your point is well taken. That I'm going to amend it just a little bit, because this is something we're going to encounter more and more. I talked about law and society. What is the basic building block of society?
Law.
Now, what's the okay? Okay, law, but what's the basic
Family.
block? Excuse me?
Restraint.
Nah.
Family.
Who said family? They get a candy bar. Okay. Because that's exactly it. Family is the basic building block of society. One of the other laws I picked up is gonna reflect back on that, but family is your building block. So if you don't have this defined family unit where the parents are the parents and the children are the children, you have problems with society. Yeah, I'll go there. Okay. It always makes my teeth itch a little bit when I'm sitting in synagogue and we having a bar bat mitzvah, and one of the parents says that the child is their best friend. Makes my teeth itch.
Yeah.
Because the best friend to the child is somebody else's job. Your job is to be their parent. Those are two vastly different roles. They're both important roles, but I have a hard time with them being one and the same. Family, excuse me?
I was yelling at the cat.
Okay. Family is the basic building block of society, and you're going to see over and over again these ideas of making the family safe and secure so you can have the next block, these families can come together to create a larger society. If the family unit is not strong, nothing else is going to be strong either. Yes, the obvious, go ahead. Linda, did you want to say something?
No,
Okay.
no.
The obvious comeback to that is in our day and time, Rabbi, can you give us a working definition of family? It's an interesting one. What it was when I was a child in the 1960s, what I saw presented to me on television and in TV commercials as family is not the same physical family that I see in 2025. But what I do see as the commonality is a family unit that's based upon love. So I would think if we take that as a starting point, I think we'll end at a good point. Other thoughts on insulting your mom and dad or striking them?
Well,
Yeah.
I think ironically about family, and the Torah tells us that the problems that we have in life, the most problems are with our family. That's the most difficult situations in life. Much easier to deal with friends than it is to deal with your parents or children or siblings. So it's ironic that yes, it's important, but it's also where all the problems are.
Stan, I will own this one. I'll ask the question, what of the 10 commandments, which one is the hardest? I mean, don't kill. Anybody in the room here committed murder this week? So far, so good. Okay. Anybody here hold up a 7-Eleven? So far, so good. Those are easy to keep. The ones that I think are hard, don't covet. That's hard. That's hard. But I think the hardest, honor your father and mother. I think that's far and away the hardest one because I think that rebellion is a natural part of the growing up process. I joke, am I talking about going back to grandchildren for a second, Miriam? My sweet spot with kids is 7 to 14. They're big enough you can do things with them. They can interact with them. At 15, they lose their minds. But this is the natural order of things. I think there's something very much to that. So for me, honor your father and mother, I think it's, in terms of difficult to keep, is one of the hardest ones to keep. Don't steal, don't murder. I can work with those pretty easily. But honoring your mom and dad can be a little bit harder. All right, George, next one is going to be 21 verse 24. This is one of the more famous lines in Torah. Ayin tachat ayin, shen tachat shen, yad tachat yad, regel tachat regel.
Okay.
What's the matter, George?
Okay, it's
I haven't even translated it yet, and you're already.
Okay, because I got it.
Okay,
5 ways they could do it. Okay, go ahead.
Let me share the translation first. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand,
Right.
for foot.
Okay, it's
Okay.
in Baba something, I don't know, 10th chapter, where there's compensation, okay? In other words, there's compensation for your suffering, for time off, for, loss of an eye, whatever it might be. So it's not, they don't put out your eye, okay?
What?
In Talmud times.
Oh, no. The Talmudic times are during Roman times. It's an incredibly barbaric part of time.
Right.
I think they absolutely meant it eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
Okay, well, the Talmud disagrees,
Who's ever seen the movie or the stage play Fiddler on the Roof? Okay. That's the great thing. When I worked at the LA Jewish Home, I could make that reference and everybody knew what I was talking about. If I'm talking to a group of high schoolers, not necessarily. Okay. Tevye makes an observation about this line. It's very much what George is saying. Tevye points out, if you have eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, you have a bunch of blind and toothless people running around.
Right.
Okay. I think that's very much the case. They began to realize that you get the sentiment, you get the idea, but you also have a lot of solace with acting this out. Okay. So they decide by Roman times that this has to be, it's not physical, it's mammon, it's money, that these have to be monetary damages. And they begin to work out, and when people ask me, what is Talmud? Talmud is basically a rabbinic discussion trying to figure out Torah, trying to figure out Jewish life. And one of the things they're trying to figure out is in society, when we have damages, what do damages look like? And as George points out, they eventually come up with some type of comparison. What is the value of an eye? What is the value of a tooth? So that you don't have a bunch of blind and toothless people running around, but you have an idea of monetary compensation to make the person quote unquote whole, and to recognize also guilt. That somebody did something that they are culpable and responsible for. So this Old Testament idea, the Torah idea of eye for an eye, on one level we kind of get that as a form of justice. We also understand that justice without compassion is harsh. So we're looking for what moderates this idea of eye for an eye, and the conclusion becomes these have to be monetary damages. George?
Yeah. I see it's Baba Kama. I knew it was Baba something. I see here Baba Kama. Yeah.
The 3-volume Baba set is always a good starting point.
Right.
Other thoughts about eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth? Yeah, Neil.
Interestingly enough, what if you made the penalty more severe than the crime? That discourages the crime more.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Okay, and I think this is where I remember one of my preambles was we bring our experiences to the table. So my experience in working with addiction recovery. Does anybody here believe that heroin is good for you? Anybody want to assert that in the positive? Because every addict I ever worked with knew that heroin was bad. They knew that it would kill them, literally. They had friends who died of overdoses. How many of them stopped using heroin because it was bad for them?
None.
That's right. That's right, Stan. 0. None of them stopped because they were afraid of dying. So my point being, Neil, is I don't see consequence as a deterrent.
Well, if the consequence is severe enough, it should discourage people from doing it.
I would put out there that, okay, this is again my experience, and you can be interested in hearing somebody else's, that everybody who was an addict and knew that this was bad and knew that it was fatal, it's pretty bad, it didn't stop them. I just in my life experience, I don't see consequence as an actual deterrent. I worked in banking when I was in college. I was a bank teller. I was in 5 bank robberies. All those robbers knew that robbing banks was illegal. All of them knew that the FBI would be after them. It didn't stop them from robbing the bank.
Well, if they can get away with it, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting to get away with it. That's interesting. That's a tough one. Neil, honestly, my thesis is that I don't think that deterrent that consequence is a big deterrent. Does it keep everybody from on the straight and
What
narrow?
about penalties for drunk driving?
I think it's the same thing. I don't think every drunk driver knows that it's a bad idea, but it doesn't stop a significant number of them from getting behind the wheel. Stan, before I forget, what you want to say?
I was going to say that it's human nature to always say, not me. That there are consequences, but not me. So that's the start of, and this idea as far as addiction and higher power and all that, it takes some way to say I can't make all the decisions for myself. I have to do something, that type of thing.
Okay, something to that. I don't want to go too deep down the addiction recovery rabbit hole, though, if it's okay. Neil, I think that if your idea is that if somebody is considering the cost versus the benefit, that the cost of doing something is going to be too high, I do think there's something to that. when do people change their ways? Now, one theory is people don't change, they are who they are. But I would also say that sometimes, not always, people change when the cost of doing what they're doing is more than they want to pay.
Right.
So a benign example would be somebody is told by their doctor, you need to lose 50 pounds for the sake of your heart.
Mhm.
Does every patient do that?
No.
Okay. But they all know that carrying that extra weight is a bad thing.
Okay, Ron, first of all, thank you
Uh-oh.
for using Bob as an example. But, I think when we use blanket statements that people will not use, do not care about consequences, or people do care about consequences, we're putting ourselves in a problem because everybody is different. I think there are some people who will in fact say to themselves, wait a minute, I know what the consequences are. I'm not going to do that if it's premeditated. Case in point, just yesterday, actually, when we picked up our grandson from school, we were just having a conversation. He'll be 13 in March, and talking about behaving in school. I don't know how it came up. Anyway, I said, well, if you do that, whatever we were talking about, I said, you'll probably, your mom's going to take your phone away from you probably for a month. And he said, yeah, I know, that's why I'm going to behave. And he meant that his phone being taken away from him for a month was a consequence that he didn't want to deal with. My reply to him was, well, shouldn't you behave appropriately just because it's the right thing to do? I'm a bubby, what can I tell you? But so in some cases, consequences can be a deterrent, but in many cases, it's not a deterrent. It just depends upon the circumstances and the person.
So we're being recorded. So I'm going to say this in public space. Miriam, you're right.
Whoa!
Please
We've known each other a long time, by the way,
Just
guys. We've been friends for a long time. That's a real big milestone.
Circle the date in red.
Yes.
Let's use your grandson as the example, okay? For him, the cost of doing what he shouldn't was a price he didn't want to pay. Okay, he didn't want to pay the cost of losing his cell phone. I get that, okay? And I also get your point. I think it's valid. When I paint with a broad brush, there's always going to be things that I'm either just flat out wrong about, or that there are going to be exceptions to it. I agree with that. Well, now that I've bought a ticket to heaven with that one, let me go on to any other thoughts about eye for an eye? All right, George, 22-4.
Okay.
Okay.
22-4, gotcha.
When any party who owns livestock lets it loose to graze in another's land and so allows a field or a vineyard to be grazed bare, restitution must be made for the impairment of the field or the vineyard. California being a UCC state, Uniform Commercial Code state, we kind of get this. If this goes back to orderly society we talked about earlier, in an agrarian society, do cattle, horses, goats know from property lines? No, of course they don't. They're hungry, they start eating, and they just keep going and going and going. So what we're putting the onus on is the owner of that livestock has a responsibility to control them. And if he or she does not, there are consequences. And that consequence is going to be making the party who was damaged by the behavior of the livestock, make them whole.
But what about the farmer whose field has been invaded? Isn't it his responsibility to put up fencing?
I have a gut feeling that in the world they lived in, that fencing was few and far between. Something to keep in mind. I grew up in Canoga Park in the 1960s. There were still working horse ranches all up and down Winnetka Avenue. Barbed wire was something I saw every day. But barbed wire isn't invented until the 1880s. So fencing, in a lot of ways, is a more modern construct than it is an ancient construct. I think what they're trying to recognize in the world they lived in, that the owner of the livestock has a responsibility to keep his animals under control.
How do you control an animal? Like, let's say a cow, he shouldn't go here. I mean, you're not there with the cow all day.
Actually, that's the answer, is that you do have to have a staff member, a person, a shepherd out there with them all day. But this is one of the things the shepherd has to do, is to keep the animals in control and to keep them safe from predators.
Yeah.
It's that they live in a world where fencing is not as common as it becomes later on. You don't always think you don't always think of a fence as a modern invention. But when you visit archaeological sites, fencing is now one of the things you see a lot.
No, but they have walls.
Around a city, yes, but out in the countryside where you have agriculture going on, not necessarily. I think it's trying to tell us that this Judaism is very big on one thing, on several things. It was really big on the idea of personal responsibility. It's going to be a theme you're going to see over and over again in Torah, that each of us is responsible for our actions and responsible for the actions of those under our supervision. This is going to be a theme we're going to see over and over again. Let's do, I'm going to skip one. Maybe we'll come back to it. Chapter 22, verses 17 and 18. The first one is, you don't allow a witch to live.
Yeah.
Okay. The question you immediately have is how are they defining witch?
Yeah.
And we know from the story of Moses meeting Pharaoh that magic appears to be a real thing in those days. That this is a real thing. Why is witchcraft such a big deal? And there's a lot of sages have different ideas about it. One of them is, of course, the idea that witchcraft is a threat to the idea of only one God, that there's only one creator and one creator of natural order in the world. But there, again, a death penalty profession, that if you do this, you will die.
If you are a witch, or if you go to the witch.
That's okay. Let's do the first one first. The way this is written is talking about the person who is the witch. You're correct that later on in particular, there's going to be rules enacted by the kings of Israel specifically against going to a witch. And the classic example of king is Saul.
He went to a witch.
Right. And the witch of Endor, and she says, I can't help you. The king's gonna put out a death penalty if I do. So again, I'm kind of fascinated by the idea that actual witchcraft, as we would define it, seems to have existed, and that there's a prohibition against it. The next part of that verse is, whoever lies with a beast like he lies with a man shall be put to death. So if we have a law in Torah against bestiality, why? And I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. Family unit is the basic building block of society. What are things that can endanger a family unit is, what's the word I'm looking for? Is when you have somebody who strays, somebody who is not keeping to the relationship. So you're going to see in a lot of the laws concerning intimate relations, this idea of fidelity. There's what I'm looking for. This idea of fidelity is very, very important, because they see nothing can destroy a family unit faster than infidelity.
Infidelity with an animal, or infidelity with like you and your dog, or you and your horse?
I think they're seeing it the same way, that you're showing that you are preferring the company of somebody or something else to the spouse.
And then,
That's-
and who would know unless someone's watching? It's not that the dog's gonna go tell anybody, you know?
I agree though. Okay, so to your point, I agree. It has to be, it would have to have a witness.
Right.
Okay, because you're right. I don't think, you know, it's funny. We're going to read later on in the summer about the talking donkey, okay. And, you know, the question becomes up, why doesn't Bilam jump off the mountain? You know what I mean? Like, if I'm walking along and the donkey starts talking to me, I'm
Oh,
leaving.
man.
I am not engaging that donkey in conversation. Okay. I grew up watching Mr. Ed, but I know that horses don't talk. Okay. So you're right. It has to be something that's witnessed. Okay. Because you're right. So the animal is unlikely to file a complaint. Something very near and dear to the Jewish people. George, I'm 22:20.
Okay.
You shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not ill-treat a widow or an orphan. So you're going to have these three classes, the ger, the almanah, and the yatom. The stranger, the widow, and the orphan. What do
Right.
all these three things have in common?
Well,
They all need help.
Very good. They all need help.
yeah, yeah.
They're
Because-
alone.
They're
Alone.
alone.
Alone. Good. Let's expand that a little bit. They're the most vulnerable classes in
Right.
the society.
Right.
And particularly, let's be honest about this. In a patriarchal world, all three of those classes are existing without a male figurehead. Therefore, they are considered to be the most vulnerable. At least the widow and the orphan.
Right.
Excuse me?
Stranger could be the male, you don't know.
We'll get to the stranger in just a second. Let's do the widow and the orphan first.
Right.
Very vulnerable. Why do I have balloons? Okay.
Yeah.
Very vulnerable.
Who's giving us
Oh.
tunes?
I have no idea why I'm doing that. Okay. They're vulnerable because in a patriarchal world, they don't have a male protector.
Right.
Okay. So we're told specifically, do not mistreat them. Mistreating the most vulnerable in your society is wrong. Just end of story. The stranger, not as is again, because they're not a citizen, because they're not part of the larger group, they're considered vulnerable. Okay? And they can be, as you pointed out, male or female, but that stranger among you, the resident alien, don't oppress them either. Why? Because you know what it's like. You lived through being resident aliens in the land of Egypt, and look how that turned out. Do you want to be in the same boat? Miriam, you look perplexed over there.
I'm not perplexed at all. I'm just thinking about the country in which we currently live. So
So a question I would get an awful lot is how when I would get questions like you're kind of alluding to there, how does Judaism view this? How does Judaism view that? That's kind of the prism I look through is don't oppress the widow, the orphan, or the stranger. And I'll ask myself, does this comply with that? And that becomes a challenge to us. I think very much so. I think the oppressing comes easy in our human nature. It comes way too easy. One of the questions I said, you know, why do we have laws? And I said, to help us live well. I think this is a good example of us. It's to keep our less good inclinations, to help keep them at bay. I think there's something very much along those lines going on. That oppressing somebody because they're not the same, because they're not a part of the group, is way too easy. And we're trying to keep that from happening. Am I supposed to be letting them in?
yes, if someone's asking to come in, you have to let them in. If they belong to the group.
You act like I know how to do that, Miriam. That's very nice. Okay, that'll be my next workshop in learning how to do that, obviously.
Class is almost over. You got 2 more minutes. Unless you-
Oh, I've got plenty of material. No, I mentioned a second ago, let me just go to another verse. This would be verse 25, George.
Okay.
I was a real estate lender for a lot of years. So laws about lending and collateral fascinate me. If you take your neighbor's garment and pledge, you must return it before the sun sets.
Mhm.
Okay, so David wants to borrow $10 from me, and he gives me his jacket as collateral
Mhm.
until he pays me back. Okay. In American custom, I hang on to that jacket until I get back $10. But in Torah, I've got to give him back that jacket every evening. How come?
It's cold.
Yeah, that's literally it. It's cold out. I'm not supposed to make him suffer in the cold because I'm holding his jacket as collateral. We view that as ridiculousness. We view that as cruelty. Okay, give him back his jacket. What's he supposed to do the next morning?
Give it back to you.
Yeah, it's kind of a circle, but the idea being is that we're not supposed to be oppressing our neighbor, our fellow citizen, but also we have to remember that he's a human being. We have to treat them with dignity. I have to say, as a mortgage lender, we didn't tear up the deed of trust every evening and restore it every morning. It's a much different custom that we have in American lending law. Do I have time for one more?
Probably.
Go ahead.
Okay. George, it's 2319. When I worked at the Jewish home, this is one of the laws that my staff found the most baffling.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Al tivashel gadi b'chalav imo. Don't cook a calf in its mother's milk.
Right.
Okay. They kind of understood, my non-Jewish staff in the dietary department, they kind of got the part about, okay, don't eat pork, don't have ham, don't have shellfish. They thought we were a little bit off the path on, because shellfish, they tell me, is really, really good. But don't have a cheeseburger. Don't put meat on pizza. They physically didn't get.
Mhm.
Okay. Why do we do this?
Doesn't it have to do with the chasing the mother bird away before you
Yeah.
take her eggs?
Vaguely similar, but we're not going to have. And in fact, I chose not to use that one this week.
Okay. Anybody else?
Stan?
Well, the keeping kosher is to create a community of people that are like us. It's a way of separating people into this community. That's the whole reason for what I know of kashrut, is to have this community of people who live the same way by eating the same food.
Stan, I happen to agree with you. Let me just expand on this a little bit, then I got you next, George. The idea that it's not about health. People say to me, oh, it's about trichinosis, and I'm saying, no, it's not. But if it has to do with reminding me of my identity every time I sit down to eat, I think that's very much a large part of it. So to me, it's about identity and reinforcing that identity. George?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a chok, meaning it's not logical. I mean, you can't explain it by logic. You can do not murder. We get that. Okay, now it's mixing something live and something dead. Maybe that's something there. Also, it's talking red meat, and the Talmud extends it to chicken and turkey.
Yes, it does.
You might make a mistake. So it goes beyond that. And it's also mentioned 3 times, which means there's some kind of emphasis here.
I think because let's attack those one by one. Yes, I think there is a definite emphasis because it's so tempting to make a cheeseburger. I think that it is not logical. I can't give you don't steal. I can give you a reason for that. For not having a cheeseburger, much more difficult. I'll end on this note. Yes, Stan, did you want to add something?
But also in the Talmud, there's discussion of who you can eat with if you're eating milk and they're eating flesh. That's
also true, but let's hold that. I'm gonna come to there in just a second. there's an expression that halakha, Jewish law, is a mountain suspended by a thread. You have this very sparse line. So don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Nowhere does it say have separate dishes.
Right.
Nowhere does it say one set melchik, one set fleishik. And nowhere does it say, and by the way, have another set for Pesach. Doesn't say that. What do you do if you use a melchik fork or melchik spoon to have meat chili? What do you do with that spoon?
Right.
Stick it in the dirt.
Right.
Dirt is one. What else?
Fire.
Fire is two. What else?
Bury it.
We got bury already. You can boil it.
Well,
Okay. None of those is mentioned in Torah.
right.
Okay. Those are all things we've derived since then. And you follow the one that your mother taught you, by the way. Judaism puts a big emphasis on something you learned from your parents has a lot of weight, has a lot of meaning to it. If the most common one I see when I watch people lighting candles on Friday night, all kinds of different motions and ways that they do it. How many of them are correct? All of them. Whatever your grandmother taught you, that works for me. I'm not going to tell her she's wrong. Are you? So this thing with don't cook a calf in its mother's milk, it's one simple line. But yet from this, we derive page after page after page of laws about keeping kosher. It's fascinating in that regard. Kosher, halakha is a mountain suspended by a thread. And to me, this is the best example of that. My friends, thanks for joining me today. I'm glad we got together. If you see me around, some of you I've known like Miriam for an awful long time. Some I'm just meeting for the first time today. So if you see me around HAMAKOM, please say hello. Look forward to seeing you all again.
Right.
Thank you for
Thank
learning.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Ron. You
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
About
Thanks.
Good Shabbos.